Oh yeah, we're on mute. Should I start over? Okay. Everybody has to warm up their voice. So Anin, greetings. I was just saying thanks to Astri for organizing and inviting us and indeed even thinking about having these regional meetings, that it's been such a nice something to look forward to, especially after 2 years of not having meetings. I'd mentioned the fact that I was the past president of NAISA in 2017-18, back when we used to go to big cities and have hundreds of people gathered, if not thousands of people gathered for our NAISA meetings. I'm a professor of American Studies and American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota. I'm also Red Lake Ojibwa from northern Minnesota, and my Ojibwa name is Benet. And my colleague, Christine Baeumler, who's the chair of the Department of Art at the University of Minnesota, we're here to talk about our proposal for an exhibit. And we're hoping to kind of get feedback from folks, either those of you who are here or people who are online. And that would also include, I think we're going to ask Astrid to post our email addresses on our send them out to folks, because people might have ideas for us that even they're not thinking about this morning, for us, ways for us to connect around this exhibit that we're thinking of. So we have kind of a new research, I guess I would say, a new kind of research project and proposal at the University of Minnesota. And it's our intention to develop a new research center on campus. And I think this is the little phrase I often use: to make Indigenous arts and lives and perspectives in the past and present more visible. So that's part of our goal. And when we've been talking about the idea of a new research center on campus around art, we wanted to make sure that we were kind of thinking in, I always think it's like concentric circles, that we're talking about our own Ojibwa and Dakota people who are surrounding the area where the University of Minnesota is located, but also that we want to think national and globally about Indigenous projects. And also that we don't want to make so much of a distinction between what people in the museum world always think of as fine art and traditional arts. And so that's something that, a lot of Native artists find a kind of artificial division. We have, as our first big efforts along with this new research projects, 2 exhibitions that we're planning for 2024. And the one that we're here to kind of talk to you about will be about Indigenous art and climate change. And we have a kind of slide here for one of the paintings we're sure that's going to go into the exhibit. And this is by my wonderful colleague, who's also a Red Lake Ojibwa. And he's kind of known actually in the US as being a digital artist. And I think his training was around digital arts. So he's very big in the kind of arts world and his digital films. But he's also a very interesting painter, as you can see here with this large canvas called On the Grave of the Giant that is just from 2020. And this piece is about a canvas about 6 feet tall. So it's quite a big piece and impressive when you see it in person. And if you look at it, you can see that there's a lot kind of going on there, that it's about the pandemic, it's about climate change, environmental kind of destruction, the scariness of all those things that are happening to us in our environment. But it's also about harvesting wild rice, which is what Ojibwa people do in the late summer and early fall. And wild rice is our sacred food. And since the settlement of Minnesota and the Great Lakes, stemming from especially the 19th century and the early 20th century, there has been a diminishing landscape for ricing, which grows naturally in the headwaters of rivers and many of our lakes, our smaller lakes and the Great Lakes. And it needs a certain kind of environment to grow well. And mining, dam construction, and these sorts of things have been very damaging to our wild rice habitats. So we're worried about that now, as you can see in Jonathan Thunder's painting, but we're also we've been concerned about these things for a long time, well over a century. in the Great Lakes. So Ojibwa people like me are one group of Anishinaabe people from the Great Lakes. And so our larger kind of, and in our language and in our ceremonies, we refer to us as Anishinaabe. And we're, as Ojibwa people, not the only Anishinaabe people, because other people like the Ottawas and the Potawatomis are also Anishinaabe. And many people call themselves that beyond just the Ojibwa people. The Ojibwa are actually one of the larger tribes in the United States and Canada, and there are about 200,000 of us who live on kind of equally divided between the border of the US and Canada. So half of us live in the United States, and some of us live in Minnesota, like my family and my tribe. In Minnesota, folks here in Norway may know, has a very interesting settler history in relationship to Sweden, Finland, and particularly Norway, because there's so many people who live in Minnesota today and in our region in the upper Midwest who are originally from these countries over here. So what else would I say? I wanted to kind of say something too about, so what we're thinking is that with this initial exhibit on Indigenous art, one of the focus will be Anishinaabe people of the Great Lakes, but in particular Ojibwa people, because they have been kind of some of our most prolific artists in the Great Lakes. And we want to talk about, you know, I think many of the issues that have concerned us for years. I often think, you know, being from a reservation community in northern Minnesota, that I like to think about reservations. We often think of them as being our homelands and our traditional lands, but I also think that reservations are reservations of land, water, plants, and forests. And I'm very struck with this sometimes when I fly up around in northern Minnesota, because you can see the boundaries of our reservation because it's green and it's full of forests. And everything around us is agricultural land. And so there have been a lot of changes to the landscape over the last century and longer. Our people have worked very hard to protect all of that. And especially in the era of climate change. But as someone who is a historian, I take the long view of climate change, especially because the problems that we face today are rooted in, you know, as I'm suggesting, in the 19th or early 20th century settler history of the Great Lakes, especially the environmental disasters relating to cutting down of the white pine forests, the destruction of our bogs and wetlands, and other regions like our wild rice areas in the Great Lakes. We've been involved in some pretty epic struggles in the Great Lakes to protect our homelands and our water. And you can see that in Jonathan Thunder's painting. And I would also, we need to do something. We need to call in the professional to advance our PowerPoint. You can just maybe, yeah, it's the one I want to talk about next too. It's this is another painting that is, actually this one is by my husband, Steve Primo, who is also an Ojibwa artist from another community in Minnesota. And you can see here, he's talking very directly about the present day struggles, especially use the figure. I don't know how else to describe, but the figure that he has, there's a number 3, which is a reference to the oil pipeline we've been fighting against in Minnesota. There's kind of an aging infrastructure for pipelines, which have now kind of gone through this, I don't know what you call that when you refurbish your pipelines, but a new system kind of put in place, and the pipelines have been updated. But of course, with that, we worry because of its location to the Mississippi River about the potential environmental damage. And you've probably heard about Standing Rock and other events related to pipeline struggles for many Native people living in the Midwest, but including Ojibwa people. So that's what we're sort of thinking of when it comes to this art exhibit. These are a couple of paintings that initially inspired us, but we're also going to kind of give a nod to some of our other, some of the artists who also just have portrayed, the environment of the Great Lakes. This is another of my, Steve Primo, my husband's painting, and this is just of folks out wild ricing. And this is another mid-century artist from northern Minnesota, Patrick Desjardins, who was very influenced by Cubism in his work. And you can see I love this painting very much, which is of Red Lake fishermen, coming from a family of fishermen and women. And you can see too, in the harvesting of blueberries, the concern for environment, even though this work is now decades old. And then Christine's going to talk, but I just want to mention one more artist who's just turned 80. We had a birthday party for him just a couple of weeks ago, Carl Gaboy, who's a Boy Fort Ojibwe person. And he also does a lot of scenes of, in some ways they seem a little kind of vintagey images, because he likes to paint scenes from his childhood and his young life, like this one of people at a powwow scene. But Carl has people out ricing. He has a lot of images of the landscapes of Lake Superior. And because Carl is also Finnish, in addition to being Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, he has some paintings which are about his grandparents' farm in Minnesota, from his childhood to his Finnish ancestors in Minnesota, which I find kind of interesting that he kind of blends that together. In Minnesota, we call that those folks Finnishinaabe. And so we will probably feature some of the work of Carl Gaboy too. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine and let her talk about how we imagine kind of expanding the conversation and the relationships that we want to develop as part of this exhibit that we're going to have back in Minnesota, but we hope we'll be able to expand.
Thank you, Brenda. And again, I want to thank the university and thank you for inviting us here. This is my first NAISA conference, so I'll look forward to coming back when we can share more about the exhibition and our programming. As Brenda mentioned, I am a professor in the Department of Art at the University of Minnesota. My ancestry is German and Swedish, so I am a white settler on Dakota and Anishinaabe lands. And that's something that I think is important for me to acknowledge my relationship in that way. And I would like to also just acknowledge Troy Sturfel, who is our wonderful collaborator actually on this project, and who will be introducing us to artists and communities while we're here in Sapmi. So before I begin, I just want to talk a little bit about this painting that you see on the screen. This is by the Ojibwe artist Jim Denemy, and it's called Standing Rock. It's from 2016. It's a very large painting, and I have to say that Jim Denemy is one of our really great painters, not only in Minnesota, but in the United States, and just recently in February passed away. And so this is quite a tragedy for our community and our arts community. Jim did this painting. He was not able to go to Standing Rock because of an illness, but his son, Cody, and his wife, Diane Wilson, who's a well-known author, spent time there. Jim watched some of the things that were being posted on Facebook and painted this very powerful painting about the white supremacist oppression and violence that was going on at Standing Rock. and also the resistance of the people, the water protectors, and also Jim talked as well about the spiritual beings that are represented in the form of these frogs who were protecting the water protectors. So this is just a painting that we wanted to share with you, similar to Steve Primo's piece that really directly confronts the impacts of the kind of history that Brenda was talking about, which is a history in the United States of seeing the natural world, the water, the earth, the air, the more than human kin as natural resource rather than relative. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to represent in our exhibition is that kind of mindset that we are thinking about the world as relative and not as resource. Just in terms of the way we're going about planning for this exhibition, we are here to listen and to learn from communities and from artists about what are the primary and impacts that they identify on their cultural ways of living, on the environment in their communities, and how they might want to share their perspectives and thoughts and concerns through their artwork with us in the United States. We hope that this exhibition and the programming that accompanies it will be a platform to amplify the voices and perspectives of Indigenous artists of Northern climates and how they're experiencing climate change. So we also see this as a catalyst for dialogue. So it's not just about images on a wall, but we hope to have some kind of a symposium. We're looking into having perhaps some kind of a film series that would be, we'll ask for Troy for his assistance on that. And then we just want to really challenge some of the dominant cultural and very destructive narratives of the colonization that go on in the University of Minnesota, as well as in our country in general. And I'll just say a couple other things about this exhibition. We want it to be interdisciplinary, intergenerational. We want the themes to emerge as we talk to the artists and talk to communities. But some of the themes that are starting to emerge are around social and environmental justice, resistance, resilience, healing, restoration and repair, the kind of cultural activities that are impacted by climate change. And then also, what are some of the materials that artists are using that are thinking about sustainability in terms of their practice? We're also thinking about artists who are really emphasizing place-based practice, traditional ecological knowledge, and also imagined futures. So we would really welcome your suggestions and advice and thoughts as we move forward with this exhibition. We are going to be visiting the Venice Biennale to see the Sami Pavilion, but we are also very curious to know if you have some artists that you might recommend to us that we may not be aware of and we could incorporate into this exhibition. So Brenda, would you like to add anything to that?
I think so. Yeah, just kind of emphasize that point that what got us thinking about kind of Sami country as something that would be a good, something that we could also feature in this exhibit is you have to narrow your exhibit down some way. You know, it's like we can talk about the, you know, Indigenous people in the whole wide world, but we thought particularly about Sami people because I'm from a cold climate and we live in a cold climate in Minnesota. And we know that the environment is being affected in particular ways for people who live in cold climates. So that's what, you know, one of the things that we have in common. So that's why we're going to kind of reach out to Sami country. And like I say, it doesn't have to be Jim Downamy or Jonathan Fender, people who are overtly talking about oil pipelines and, you know, very political kind of work, but also, you know, like I say, we're interested in people who've been doing work talking about culture, environment for a long time. Like I say, some of the mid-century artists that we have that we really love and very beloved to us. we are, we're thinking about them too. And we don't know everything about here in Norway, but we're hearing that you've got some really special art and people here that's been around for a long time. So maybe we can kind of, we're showing you these pieces so that it might kind of stir something, and you'll think, oh yeah, that reminds me of somebody else, who was working in the 50s or 60s and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Any questions or comments? You in the chat can also ask questions if you have some. I see that maybe it's yeah, I cannot see any questions or comments. Yeah, Dorte.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting to hear about your plans and see the beautiful pictures also. I have some few remarks. I wonder if you have been in contact with the new National Museum in Norway, which have a Sami new exhibition there. Yeah, nobody has seen it yet, but we hear about it. So that could be interesting, I suppose. And for example, in I don't know, maybe you have been in contact with in Finnmark, they have this project, Daidodalo. Daidodalo, they have a project where different kind of artists, not only painters, of course, it's film. I don't know how broad you are going to be, but they have on film. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Because they have different kind of people there, so it's a good kind of network that could be good to contact, because then they can help you to get in to meet different people that are involved there. And I also was thinking, are you restricting it to only artists being indigenous making art about it, or can it also be others that make art about the indigenous? For example, in Norway, we have had and still have this center here in Nordland with Per Adde and Kajsa. I don't know. That could be an example. So, and also maybe some of what you are doing could be somehow connected to Bodø 2024, Astrid. Maybe you could do something there to connect things, because I would have loved to have this exhibition here in Bodø in 2024. That would have been great. Yeah. Okay. But Bodø 2024 is a cultural capital, and this would have been lovely to have during that year.
We would, I
Or
mean,
after.
having a traveling aspect of it, I think would be ideal. Mhm.
Other questions or comments? I have a comment myself.
Yes,
I think that kind of I think it's so interesting to show this kind of potential of art regarding kind of in relation to activism. And I think that kind of it's a long line of kind of generations of indigenous artists that kind of show the importance of art, and as a kind of also not only as kind of something that you can, something beautiful that you can put on a wall, but as a way of kind of as a radical intervention in the world. And also kind of imagining an alternative future. I think that's so inspiring to see that's kind of, I think that's very interesting. As a social scientist, I'm of course,
Yeah.
kind of, I'm interested in how this also is a way of changing the world through art. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the minimum, you know, when the exhibit opens, we could do a presentation at NAISA with what the exhibit turned out to be, you know, how it, how the story ends kind of. I mean, we don't really look at it ending with an exhibition opening, but that would be a nice thing too. And I think it's kind of, you know, in the spirit of NAISA, right? This exhibition, because, you know, at one point in our academic work, we were very separate from one another, right? And now we tend to think, instead of just our closest neighbors, we tend to think more globally. And so I think that's kind of the spirit of what we want to bring to this exhibition. But the other part of this is we know that in Minnesota, with all the settlers from this part of the world, that there will be kind of an inherent interest in the Sami art and artists because of our population. So that comparative framework, I think, is very suited to who we are in Minnesota.
thank you. I don't see any more questions, so
But you can email us.
yeah.
later. Thank you.